In exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes, the state of Texas would inject lethal poison into Jake Sullivan's veins. His final request left Warden Patricia Hayes speechless. "I want to see Thunder one last time." It wasn't what condemned men usually asked for. The coffee mug slipped from Hayes's trembling fingers, shattering against the concrete floor as she stared at the 34-year-old former Marine through the bulletproof glass. The metallic clang echoed through the death row corridor, causing every guard to freeze mid-step. 5 years ago, Jake had rescued Thunder from a slaughterhouse, a 1,200-pound Brahman bull with scars across his black and rust-colored hide. The same bull who had refused to eat a single bite since Jake's arrest, slowly wasting away in a Texas pasture 60 miles from this concrete tomb. "Get Dr. Rodriguez on the phone," Hayes commanded, her voice cracking despite 30 years of maintaining composure. "And call Sarah Mitchell." What did a dying man know that the rest of them didn't? And why did Thunder's name make her hands shake with inexplicable dread? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Jake Sullivan wasn't supposed to be here. At 34, the former Marine should have been working his small cattle ranch in the Texas Hill Country, maybe starting a family with Sarah Mitchell, the veterinarian who'd stolen his heart but never knew it. Instead, he sat on death row for a murder he didn't commit, counting down his final hours while the woman he loved bankrupted herself keeping his bull alive. The ranch had been his father's dream, passed down through 3 generations of Sullivans who'd worked the same 100 acres outside Austin. Jake had returned from 2 tours in Afghanistan with invisible wounds that made sleep impossible and crowds unbearable. But Thunder had changed everything. The massive Brahman bull, barely 8 months old when Jake found him destined for slaughter, had somehow understood what the VA doctors couldn't, that healing came through trust, not pills. Thunder stood apart from ordinary cattle. His black hide bore rust-red markings that caught the Texas sun like burnished copper, and a distinctive white scar across his forehead told the story of early abuse. At 1,200 pounds, he should have been intimidating, but his dark eyes held an intelligence that unsettled even experienced ranchers. While other bulls charged at strangers, Thunder would approach with careful steps, as if reading their intentions. Sarah Mitchell had fallen in love twice the day she met them, first with Thunder's gentle giant spirit, then with Jake's patient way of handling him. Orphaned at 16 when her parents died in a car accident, Sarah had built walls around her heart that only Thunder seemed able to breach. She'd spent her savings from veterinary school to help Jake care for the bull, never admitting her deeper feelings for the quiet Marine who spoke more to his animals than to people. The murder of Richard Caldwell, Austin's most powerful real estate developer, had shattered their fragile world. Caldwell had been pressuring Jake to sell the ranch for months, offering increasingly aggressive buyout packages. When Jake continued refusing, tensions escalated. Witnesses heard them arguing at Murphy's Bar the night before Caldwell's body was found in his downtown penthouse, stabbed 12 times with a military-issue knife that bore Jake's fingerprints. Detective Tom Bradley had built what seemed like an airtight case. Jake's PTSD episodes, his financial struggles, the public argument, the weapon, everything pointed to a veteran who'd finally snapped under pressure. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Judge William Harrison sentenced Jake to death with unusual haste, ignoring character witnesses who testified about Jake's gentle nature with animals. Now, 5 years later, Sarah worked 3 jobs to pay Thunder's mounting veterinary bills. The bull had stopped eating the day Jake was arrested, growing thinner despite her desperate efforts. She'd spent $47,000 of her own money on treatments, supplements, and specialists, facing bankruptcy in 30 days. Yet she couldn't abandon Thunder any more than he could abandon Jake. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, their 75-year-old neighbor, visited Thunder daily, reading aloud from her late husband's farming journals. She'd watched the remarkable bond between man and bull develop, witnessed Thunder's uncanny ability to sense Jake's PTSD episodes before they happened, and seen the bull physically intervene when Jake's nightmares turned violent. The livestock trailer rumbled through the gates of Huntsville Unit at exactly 7:30 a.m., carrying cargo that would change everything. Sarah Mitchell gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, her veterinary license and 3 forms of identification already prepared for the guards who approached with confused expressions. Behind her, Thunder shifted his massive weight, the trailer creaking under 200 pounds of barely controlled grief. Word had spread quickly through the prison staff about Jake's unusual final request. Guards clustered around windows, their usual stoic professionalism cracking as they caught glimpses of the enormous Brahman bull. Thunder's black and rust-colored hide, once glossy with health, now hung loose over prominent ribs. His distinctive white scar seemed more pronounced against his gaunt face, and his dark eyes held a hollow sadness that made hardened corrections officers look away. "Ma'am, you understand this is highly irregular," Deputy Warden Frank Morrison said, consulting his clipboard with obvious discomfort. "We've never had a bull as a visitor before." Sarah's voice trembled as she signed the final forms. "Thunder hasn't eaten properly in 5 years. He's dying, and he knows Jake is." She couldn't finish the sentence. The irony was devastating. Both Jake and Thunder were dying today, separated by concrete walls and legal procedures that reduced love to paperwork. A crowd had begun gathering outside the prison fence. News vans arrived first, followed by curious locals who'd heard the story on morning radio. Social media erupted as photos of the cattle trailer spread across platforms. Thunder. The Loyal began trending within minutes, accompanied by grainy cell phone videos of the bull's arrival. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman emerged from a taxi, her arthritis-gnarled hands clutching a paper bag filled with Thunder's favorite treats, apple slices and molasses cookies she'd been baking for him weekly. At 75, she'd insisted on making the drive despite her daughter's protests. "That bull's been my only companion since Harold died," she told anyone who'd listen. "If he's saying goodbye to Jake, I'm saying goodbye to him." Inside the prison, Dr. Samuel Rodriguez adjusted his stethoscope with practiced calm, though his hands betrayed slight tremors. As the facility's chief medical officer, he'd witnessed over 40 executions in his 15-year career, but this felt different. The condemned man's final request had stirred something unexpected in the typically sterile environment: humanity. Thunder's trailer was positioned in the prison yard's southeast corner, where Jake could see him through the reinforced windows of the visitation area. The moment the trailer doors opened, Thunder's behavior shifted dramatically. His massive head lifted, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. Some primal recognition crossed his features. Jake's scent, faint but unmistakable, carried on the morning breeze. The bull's reaction when he saw Jake through the glass was unlike anything the assembled witnesses had ever seen. Thunder's legs buckled as if struck by lightning, his enormous body collapsing to the dusty ground with a sound like falling timber. A low, keening moan escaped his throat, not the typical bellow of cattle, but something almost human in its anguish. Sarah rushed to Thunder's side, her veterinary training warring with her emotional breakdown. Through her tears, she performed a quick examination, finding his vital signs elevated but stable. "He knows," she whispered to Dr. Rodriguez, who'd hurried out to assist. "He can sense what's happening." Jake pressed his palms against the cold glass, his own composure finally cracking. For 5 years he'd maintained his innocence with quiet dignity, refusing to let prison break his spirit. But seeing Thunder's deteriorated condition shattered his last defenses. The bull who'd saved him from countless PTSD episodes, who'd somehow known when the nightmares were coming, and would position his massive body as a living shield against the dark memories. That bull was dying of a broken heart. "Easy, boy," Jake whispered, though Thunder couldn't hear him through the reinforced barriers. "I'm here. I see you." Thunder struggled to his feet, swaying slightly as he approached the fence separating them. His behavior became increasingly agitated, pawing at the ground and repeatedly pressing his muzzle against his own stomach area. Sarah noticed immediately. It was the same gesture Thunder had been making for months, something she'd attributed to digestive issues related to his poor eating habits. "He's trying to tell us something," Mrs. Whitman observed, her weathered face creased with concern. She'd seen this behavior during her daily visits, always around the same spot on Thunder's belly. Harold used to say, "Animals know things we don't. They see truth where we see confusion." Dr. Rodriguez checked his watch. 8:15 a.m. 1 hour and 45 minutes until the execution. The crowd outside had swelled to over 200 people, their voices rising in spontaneous chants of "Save Jake" and "Thunder Knows." Local news anchors struggled to describe the unprecedented scene. A condemned man's final goodbye to his bull becoming a viral sensation that was touching hearts worldwide. Inside the trailer, Thunder continued his agitated pawing, his distress growing more pronounced. Whatever secret he'd been carrying for 5 years was demanding to be heard, and time was running out for both man and beast. Dr. Rodriguez knelt beside Thunder, his experienced hands moving across the bull's distended abdomen while Sarah held the massive head steady. The veterinarian's portable ultrasound equipment, hastily borrowed from Austin Animal Medical Center, painted grainy images across the small screen that made both doctors freeze in disbelief. "There's definitely something foreign in his stomach," Dr. Rodriguez announced, his voice cutting through the morning air like a knife. "Something metallic, and it's been there for years based on the tissue formation around it." He adjusted the ultrasound probe, trying to get a clearer image. "Sarah, look at this. The object appears to be jewelry of some kind." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she studied the shadowy outline on the screen. The object was roughly circular, with what appeared to be an ornate design etched into its surface. Her mind raced back 5 years to the night of Caldwell's murder, remembering the police reports she'd read obsessively during Jake's trial. Richard Caldwell had been wearing his distinctive family signet ring when his body was discovered, except the ring was never found among his personal effects. "Jesus Christ," Detective Tom Bradley breathed, having arrived just moments earlier expecting to witness a routine final goodbye. At 55, Bradley had built his career on gut instincts that had rarely failed him. But something about Jake's case had always nagged at the edges of his consciousness. Now, staring at the ultrasound screen, those doubts crystallized into horrifying certainty. That could be Caldwell's ring. The implications hit the assembled group like a physical blow. If Thunder had somehow ingested Caldwell's missing ring, it meant the bull had been at the crime scene, or at least had access to evidence from it. But how? Jake had been arrested the morning after the murder, and Thunder had never left the ranch, unless— "Someone brought the ring to Thunder," Sarah whispered, her veterinary mind processing the timeline. "Someone who wanted to hide it where no one would ever think to look." Her voice grew stronger as the pieces fell into place. Thunder would eat anything Jake gave him, if someone made it look like Jake was feeding him treats. Bradley was already on his radio calling for emergency backup and a judge's order for immediate surgical intervention. But as he spoke, a black sedan pulled through the prison gates with the authority of someone accustomed to having doors opened before they knocked. Judge William Harrison emerged from the vehicle. His silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, his face set in the stern expression that had made him feared throughout the Texas court system. "What exactly is happening here?" Harrison demanded, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench. "I was informed there was some kind of disruption delaying the scheduled execution." Dr. Rodriguez stood slowly, ultrasound probe still in hand. "Your Honor, we've discovered what appears to be evidence related to the Caldwell murder case. Evidence that's been hidden inside this animal for 5 years." Harrison's face remained impassive, but Sarah noticed his hands clench slightly at his sides. "That's absurd. The case was thoroughly investigated and properly adjudicated. Mr. Sullivan was convicted based on overwhelming physical evidence and witness testimony. These are desperate last-minute theatrics designed to delay justice." "With respect, Your Honor," Bradley interjected, stepping forward with the authority of his 28 years in law enforcement, "if this object is indeed Caldwell's missing ring, it could fundamentally alter our understanding of what happened that night. At minimum, it raises questions about how evidence from the crime scene ended up inside an animal that never left Sullivan's ranch." The crowd outside the prison had grown to nearly 500 people, their voices rising in chants that could be heard even through the reinforced walls. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live footage of the unprecedented scene. Thunder saves. Jake had exploded across social media platforms, with posts being shared thousands of times per minute. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman pushed through the growing crowd of officials, her age and obvious frailty parting the group like Moses dividing the Red Sea. "Judge Harrison," she said, her voice carrying the quiet strength of someone who'd survived 85 years of life's hardships, "I've been visiting Thunder every day for 5 years. That bull has been in constant pain, always touching that same spot on his belly. He's been trying to tell us something, and we've been too stubborn to listen." Harrison's composure cracked slightly as he looked down at the elderly woman. "Mrs. Whitman, I understand your attachment to the animal, but—" "No, you don't understand," she interrupted, her blue eyes blazing with sudden fire. "My Harold was a veterinarian for 40 years before he passed. He taught me that animals don't lie, Judge. They can't construct elaborate deceptions or manipulate evidence for personal gain. If Thunder's been carrying something in his belly for 5 years, someone put it there deliberately." Dr. Rodriguez checked his watch. 8:45 a.m. 1 hour and 15 minutes until the execution. "Your Honor, I'm requesting emergency authorization to perform surgical extraction of this object. The procedure can be done here with portable equipment, and the results will be available within 30 minutes. "Absolutely not," Harrison snapped, his judicial demeanor slipping to reveal something harder underneath. "I will not allow this execution to be derailed by veterinary speculation and social media hysteria. The law has been followed. Justice has been served, and the sentence will be carried out as scheduled." But even as Harrison spoke, his authority was being undermined by forces beyond his control. Governor Patricia Williams's office had been flooded with calls demanding a stay of execution. The Attorney General was en route to personally oversee the situation. Most importantly, the story had captured national attention in a way that made political interference inevitable. Thunder, as if sensing the tension surrounding him, began pawing more frantically at his stomach area. His distress was evident to everyone present, and the sight of the massive bull in obvious pain was being broadcast live to millions of viewers worldwide. The clock was ticking, justice hung in the balance, and somewhere in Thunder's belly lay a truth that could save Jake Sullivan's life, if they could extract it in time. The emergency surgical suite materialized in the prison yard with the efficiency of a military operation. Dr. Rodriguez had called in favors from every veterinary colleague within a 100-mile radius, and portable equipment arrived in a convoy of vehicles that transformed the concrete space into an open-air operating theater. Thunder lay sedated on a reinforced surgical table, his massive frame requiring 4 men to position properly while Sarah scrubbed in beside the prison's medical team. Governor Patricia Williams's voice crackled through the warden's radio at exactly 9:15 a.m., carrying the weight of executive authority that even Judge Harrison couldn't ignore. "I'm issuing a temporary stay of execution pending the outcome of this surgical procedure. If evidence is recovered that could impact the conviction, this case will be reviewed immediately by the State Attorney General's office." Harrison's face had gone ashen, his usual judicial composure replaced by something that looked remarkably like panic. He stepped away from the crowd, cell phone pressed to his ear, his whispered conversation inaudible over the drone of the media helicopters circling overhead. Whatever conversation he was having, it wasn't going well. His free hand gestured frantically while sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Inside the visitation area, Jake watched through bulletproof glass as the woman he loved prepared to operate on the bull who'd saved his sanity. Handcuffed to a metal chair, he could only observe as Sarah made the first incision into Thunder's abdomen, her hands steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Every person in that yard understood they were witnessing something unprecedented, a 200-pound bull potentially holding the key to a man's innocence. Detective Bradley paced the perimeter of the surgical area, his radio crackling with updates from his team back at headquarters. The original Caldwell case files had been retrieved from storage, and what they revealed was troubling. Several pieces of evidence that should have been preserved had been mysteriously lost during the transition between evidence lockers. The second DNA sample that had been collected from under Caldwell's fingernails had been contaminated and deemed inadmissible. Most disturbing of all, the chain of custody documents showed irregularities that his younger, more ambitious self had overlooked in his eagerness to close a high-profile case. "Detective," his partner's voice crackled through the radio, "you need to hear this. We found the original crime scene photos, the ones that weren't submitted at trial. Caldwell's study shows signs of a struggle we never documented. Furniture was moved. There's blood spatter on the wall that doesn't match the bedroom where the body was found. Someone cleaned up that room before we processed it." The surgical team worked with grim efficiency as the crowd outside the prison swelled to over 1,000 people. Justice. For Jake and Hashed Thunder, the hero dominated social media platforms worldwide, with celebrities and politicians weighing in on the unprecedented case. The image of a dying bull potentially saving his master's life had captured imaginations across the globe, transforming a routine execution into a symbol of loyalty that transcended species barriers. Mrs. Whitman sat in a folding chair someone had brought for her, her weathered hands clasped in prayer as she watched Thunder's unconscious form. "Harold always said animals are God's way of showing us what love really looks like," she murmured to the young reporter who'd approached for an interview. "No agenda, no conditions, just pure loyalty. That bull's been carrying Jake's innocence inside him for 5 years, and now the truth is finally coming out." Sarah's scalpel found the foreign object 45 minutes into the surgery, embedded in scar tissue that told the story of Thunder's 5-year sacrifice. The ring, for it was unmistakably a ring, had been perfectly preserved in the bull's stomach acid-resistant coating, its ornate surface still bearing the distinctive Caldwell family crest that had been described in police reports. But more importantly, traces of blood and tissue remained on the metal, evidence that could potentially identify the real killer. "My God," Dr. Rodriguez breathed as Sarah carefully extracted the ring with surgical forceps. "How did he keep this down for 5 years without it causing more damage?" "Bulls have incredibly strong stomachs," Sarah replied, her voice tight with emotion. "But the pain must have been constant. He endured years of agony to protect Jake." She placed the ring in a sterile evidence container, her hands trembling as the magnitude of Thunder's sacrifice became clear. The bull had literally swallowed the truth to keep it safe. Judge Harrison's phone conversation had grown increasingly heated, his voice rising despite his attempts at discretion. "You promised this would never surface," he hissed into the device. "The case was supposed to be clean, permanent. How the hell was I supposed to know about a goddamn bull?" His face had gone pale as he listened to the response, his political and judicial career crumbling in real time as the surgical team documented their findings. Detective Bradley approached the evidence container with the solemnity of a man confronting his worst mistake. The ring bore obvious signs of recent violence, scratches consistent with a struggle, blood traces that appeared fresh when it was swallowed, and most damningly, what appeared to be skin cells trapped under the ornate edges. If the DNA belonged to anyone other than Richard Caldwell, it would blow the case wide open. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral when news of the ring's recovery spread through social media. Chants of "Free Jake now" echoed across the prison grounds, while counter-protesters argued that physical evidence could be planted anywhere, even inside an animal. The polarization was swift and brutal, dividing families and communities over questions of justice, animal intelligence, and the reliability of a legal system that had nearly executed an innocent man. Thunder began showing signs of distress as the anesthesia wore off, his massive frame shuddering as consciousness returned. Sarah monitored his vital signs with growing concern. The surgery had been successful, but his weakened condition from 5 years of poor eating made recovery uncertain. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Thunder might die from the very sacrifice that could save Jake's life. Inside the prison, Jake had been moved to a holding cell closer to the yard, where he could see Thunder's recovery through a small window. The condemned man's face showed a mixture of hope and anguish as he watched the bull struggle to consciousness. Every labored breath Thunder took seemed to echo Jake's own fight for survival, 2 lives hanging in the balance while lawyers and politicians decided their fate. The DNA analysis would take at least 2 hours, even with the state laboratory's expedited processing. Governor Williams had extended the stay of execution until the results were available, but political pressure was mounting from both sides. Victims' rights groups demanded the execution proceed as scheduled, arguing that last-minute theatrics undermined justice for Richard Caldwell's family. Meanwhile, animal welfare organizations and criminal justice reform advocates flooded state offices with demands for a full investigation. Dr. Rodriguez checked Thunder's surgical site one final time, satisfied that the bull would survive the procedure. "The real question now," he said to Sarah as they monitored the recovery, "is whether this ring will prove Jake's innocence or simply raise more questions. Evidence can be planted even inside an animal. We need more than just the ring to overturn a conviction." As if responding to the doctor's words, Thunder's eyes opened slowly, focusing with surprising clarity on the crowd surrounding him. His first instinct was to look toward the prison building, searching for Jake with the same determination that had sustained him through 5 years of waiting. The sight of the massive bull, scarred and weakened but still fighting, brought tears to even the most hardened observers. The truth was finally emerging from Thunder's belly, but whether it would arrive in time to save Jake Sullivan remained to be seen. Every minute that passed brought them closer to either vindication or tragedy, with a loyal bull's sacrifice hanging in the balance between justice and bureaucracy. The DNA results arrived at exactly 11:42 a.m., transmitted directly to Detective Bradley's phone as Thunder struggled to stand in the makeshift recovery area. Dr. Maria Santos, from the state laboratory's voice was steady but urgent as she delivered findings that would shatter everything the justice system thought it knew about Richard Caldwell's murder. The blood and tissue samples from the ring contained DNA from 2 individuals, Dr. Santos reported, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. The primary sample matches Richard Caldwell as expected, but the secondary sample, skin cells found under the ring's edges, belongs to Richard Caldwell, Jr. His DNA is in the system from a DUI arrest 3 years ago. Bradley's radio crackled to life as the implications hit him like a physical blow. Caldwell's own son had killed him, and somehow Thunder had been present to witness, or more accurately, to preserve, the evidence. The detective's mind raced through the timeline. If Caldwell Jr. had committed the murder, how had the ring ended up in Thunder's stomach? And why had Jake been framed for a crime committed by the victim's own flesh and blood? Judge Harrison's face had gone corpse pale as he overheard the DNA results. His carefully constructed judicial demeanor finally cracked completely, revealing the desperate man beneath the robes. "This proves nothing," he announced with false authority, his voice shaking despite his attempts at control. "DNA evidence can be contaminated, planted, manipulated. We're talking about overturning a legally obtained conviction based on evidence retrieved from an animal's stomach." "Your Honor," Bradley stepped forward, his 28 years of law enforcement experience lending weight to his words. "With respect, this evidence suggests a fundamental miscarriage of justice. If Richard Caldwell, Jr. killed his father and framed Jake Sullivan, then we've been complicit in the near execution of an innocent man." The crowd outside the prison had swelled to over 2,000 people, their voices creating a wall of sound that penetrated even the reinforced walls of the facility. News crews from every major network had arrived, broadcasting live footage of Thunder's recovery to a global audience that now numbered in the millions. The hashtag #ThunderSaves. Jake had become the top trending topic worldwide, with celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens demanding justice for both man and bull. Inside the prison, Jake sat in stunned silence as the news reached him through his court-appointed attorney, who'd driven frantically from Austin when the story broke. 5 years of maintaining his innocence, 5 years of knowing the truth while watching the world believe he was a cold-blooded killer, and now vindication was coming from the most unlikely source imaginable, the loyal bull who'd somehow preserved evidence in his own body. Thunder's recovery was progressing slowly but steadily, his massive frame supported by a custom harness that allowed him to stand without putting full weight on his surgical site. Sarah remained at his side, monitoring his vital signs while fighting back tears of exhaustion and relief. The bull's dark eyes had regained some of their former clarity, and he kept turning his head toward the prison building as if searching for Jake. The real breakthrough came when Detective Bradley's team arrested Richard Caldwell, Jr. at his downtown Austin office. The 38-year-old real estate developer had been monitoring the news coverage with growing panic, and when police arrived with a warrant, they found him in the process of shredding financial documents related to his father's estate. His lawyer's advice to remain silent lasted exactly 12 minutes before the weight of evidence and media scrutiny broke his resolve. "I never meant for it to go this far," Caldwell Jr. confessed in the interview room, his expensive suit wrinkled and his hands shaking as he spoke. "Dad found out about the oil survey on Sullivan's land. He was going to expose everything, the bribes, the falsified environmental reports, the whole Coastal Haven development scheme. When he threatened to go public, I lost control." The confession spilled out in a torrent of guilt and fear that had been building for 5 years. Caldwell Jr. had killed his father in a rage during a confrontation at the family ranch, the same property where Thunder grazed in an adjacent pasture. The bull had somehow accessed the crime scene, either breaking through a fence or following his natural curiosity toward the commotion. In the chaos following the murder, Caldwell Jr. had attempted to dispose of evidence by throwing his father's bloodied ring into what he thought was a water trough, not realizing Thunder was feeding nearby. "The bull just ate it," Caldwell Jr. said, his voice breaking as he relived the moment. "I watched this massive animal swallow the ring like it was a treat. I thought it would pass through naturally, that the evidence would be gone forever. When Sullivan was arrested the next morning, it seemed like perfect timing. Let the crazy veteran take the fall for something he didn't do." Judge Harrison's involvement in the conspiracy emerged during the extended confession. Caldwell Jr. revealed that Harrison had received substantial payments to ensure Jake's conviction proceeded swiftly, with minimal appeals and maximum media coverage to discourage other environmental protesters. The judge's motivation wasn't purely financial. His own son had died in Afghanistan, and Harrison blamed unpatriotic troublemakers like Jake for weakening American resolve overseas. The political earthquake that followed was swift and devastating. Governor Williams personally called the prison to order Jake's immediate release, while the Attorney General announced a full investigation into judicial corruption that would ultimately expose dozens of tainted cases. Harrison was arrested in the prison parking lot as he attempted to flee, his judicial career ending in handcuffs and shame. Thunder's role as an unwitting evidence locker captured the world's imagination in ways that transcended the legal drama. Animal behaviorists appeared on every news program to discuss bovine intelligence and loyalty, while legal experts debated the precedent of evidence recovered from an animal's digestive system. The bull, who'd endured 5 years of pain to preserve his master's innocence, became a symbol of devotion that crossed species boundaries. The moment Jake walked free from Huntsville Unit at 2:17 p.m., Thunder seemed to sense his master's approach despite the massive crowd and media chaos. The bull's head lifted with surprising strength, his dark eyes finding Jake through the sea of faces and cameras. The reunion that followed was captured by dozens of photographers and broadcast live to a global audience hungry for proof that loyalty and love could triumph over corruption and injustice. Jake's first words as a free man were directed not to the reporters or lawyers or politicians, but to the scarred bull who'd saved his life through unwavering faith. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, his voice breaking as he placed his hand on Thunder's massive head. "You did good. You did so good." The crowd's roar of approval echoed across the Texas landscape, a sound of vindication that had been 5 years in the making. 2 weeks after Jake's dramatic release from death row, the euphoria of vindication gave way to harsh reality as Thunder's condition deteriorated rapidly despite the successful surgery. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had moved the bull to her veterinary clinic, where she maintained a round-the-clock vigil that was slowly draining her remaining savings and emotional reserves. The surgical site had healed perfectly, but Thunder's 5-year ordeal of carrying evidence in his stomach had taken a toll that modern medicine couldn't easily repair. "His digestive system is severely compromised," Dr. Rodriguez explained to Jake during one of his daily visits, his voice heavy with professional concern. The constant irritation from the ring created chronic inflammation that we're only now fully understanding. His appetite is improving, but the damage to his stomach lining is extensive. We're looking at months of intensive treatment, possibly longer. Jake stood beside Thunder's recovery stall, his hand resting on the bull's massive neck as he absorbed the devastating news. The irony was crushing. Thunder had saved Jake's life by preserving evidence of his innocence, but that same sacrifice might cost the bull everything. The medical bills were already approaching 6 figures, and Sarah's clinic was struggling under the financial strain of providing specialized care for a 1,200-pound patient whose case had made him famous but hadn't made anyone wealthy. The media attention that had initially seemed like a blessing was becoming a burden. Reporters still gathered outside the clinic daily, their presence stressing Thunder and disrupting the other animals' recovery. Well-meaning visitors brought inappropriate treats and gifts, forcing Sarah to hire security she couldn't afford to keep the crowds at bay. The bull, who'd once found peace in quiet pastures, now lived under constant scrutiny, his every breath monitored by cameras and commented upon by strangers. Sarah's own health was suffering under the pressure. She'd lost 15 pounds in 2 weeks, surviving on coffee and determination while working 18-hour days to monitor Thunder's condition. Her other veterinary clients were beginning to complain about delayed appointments and rushed examinations as her obsession with saving Thunder consumed her professional life. The woman who'd sacrificed everything to keep the bull alive during Jake's imprisonment was now sacrificing herself to keep him alive in freedom. "You need to step back," her business partner Dr. Jennifer Adams warned during a heated confrontation in the clinic's break room. "Sarah, you're destroying yourself over this animal." Yes, what he did was remarkable, but he's still just a bull. "You can't save every animal that comes through those doors, especially not at the expense of your entire practice." The financial pressures were mounting from every direction. Thunder's specialized diet cost over $200 per day, his medications another $150, and the around-the-clock monitoring required staff overtime that was bleeding the clinic dry. Sarah had already mortgaged her house and maxed out her credit cards, but the bills kept coming with relentless persistence. The state had promised compensation for Jake's wrongful conviction, but legal settlements moved slowly while veterinary bills demanded immediate payment. Jake watched helplessly as the woman he loved destroyed herself trying to save the animal they both cherished. His own situation was complicated, technically free but practically destitute, with no home to return to since his ranch had been foreclosed during his imprisonment. The irony was bitter. He'd been proven innocent of murder but was guilty of being unable to provide for those who'd sacrificed everything for him. Thunder seemed to sense the growing desperation around him. The bull's recovery had stalled, his appetite remaining poor despite the absence of the foreign object that had tormented him for 5 years. Veterinary specialists suggested that the psychological trauma of separation from Jake, combined with the physical trauma of his ordeal, had created a syndrome they'd never encountered before. The bull was grieving, mourning the lost years as much as Jake had mourned his lost freedom. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman continued her daily visits, now serving as the only constant source of comfort in Thunder's disrupted world. At 75, she'd outlived her husband, most of her friends, and her own expectations for longevity, but Thunder's plight had given her new purpose. She read to him from farming journals and poetry collections, her weathered voice providing a soothing counterpoint to the chaos surrounding his recovery. "He's tired," she observed one evening as Jake sat beside Thunder's stall, both man and bull appearing equally exhausted. "That poor creature has been fighting for 5 years, carrying your truth inside him like a burden. Now that the truth is out, maybe he feels like his job is done." The words hit Jake like a physical blow, forcing him to confront a possibility he'd been avoiding. What if Thunder's decline wasn't purely medical? What if the bull, having completed his mission of preserving Jake's innocence, was simply ready to let go? The thought was unbearable. That Thunder might die not from his injuries but from the exhaustion of heroism, like a soldier who'd fought too long and too hard to find peace in victory. As night fell over the clinic, Jake made a decision that would define the rest of his life. The revelation came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when Dr. Lisa Chen, the new veterinarian Sarah had reluctantly consulted for a second opinion, arrived at the clinic with test results that would change everything. Jake had been sleeping in a chair beside Thunder's stall, maintaining the vigil he'd kept for 3 consecutive nights, when Dr. Chen's urgent knocking roused him from exhausted slumber. The previous diagnosis was completely wrong. Dr. Chen announced without preamble, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years specializing in large animal internal medicine at Cornell University. Thunder doesn't have chronic digestive inflammation from carrying the ring. He has acute parasitic infection, specifically a rare strain of stomach worms that's been misdiagnosed as surgical complications. Sarah appeared from the clinic's office where she'd been reviewing financial statements, her face haggard from weeks of sleepless nights and mounting stress. "That's impossible," she protested, though hope flickered in her exhausted eyes. "We've run every test, tried every treatment protocol. His symptoms are clearly consistent with parasitic infection that's been masked by the trauma of surgery," Dr. Chen interrupted, spreading laboratory reports across the examination table. "Look at these blood work results compared to the samples from 3 weeks ago. The eosinophil count is elevated in a pattern that suggests massive parasitic load, not inflammatory response to surgical trauma." The implications hit Jake like a thunderbolt. If Thunder's condition was caused by treatable parasites rather than permanent damage from carrying the ring, it meant the bull could recover completely. More importantly, it meant Thunder's heroic sacrifice hadn't doomed him to a slow, painful death. The evidence that had saved Jake's life hadn't cost Thunder his own. "Doctor." Chen continued her explanation with clinical precision that couldn't mask her excitement at solving a complex case. The parasites are a strain typically found in cattle that have grazed on contaminated land, specifically land that's been exposed to certain industrial chemicals. The Caldwell Development Project used illegal dumping of construction waste on properties adjacent to Sullivan's ranch. Thunder was infected years ago, but the symptoms were subtle until the stress of separation from Jake weakened his immune system. Detective Bradley, who'd been monitoring Thunder's condition as part of his ongoing investigation into the corruption scandal, arrived within the hour. The parasitic infection provided another piece of evidence against the Caldwell conspiracy, proof that their illegal activities had harmed not just the environment, but the animals who lived on adjacent properties. "We can add animal cruelty and environmental violations to the charges," he told Jake grimly. "This keeps getting worse for them and better for you." The treatment for Thunder's actual condition was remarkably simple compared to the complex surgical interventions they'd been attempting. A series of antiparasitic medications administered over 6 weeks would eliminate the infection that had been slowly poisoning the bull for years. The cost was a fraction of the intensive care Thunder had been receiving, meaning Sarah's clinic could finally stabilize financially while focusing on the bull's recovery. But as Thunder began responding to the correct treatment, another shocking revelation emerged from Detective Bradley's expanded investigation. The oil deposits on Jake's ranch, which had motivated Caldwell's murder and Jake's framing, were worth far more than anyone had initially estimated. Geological surveys hidden by the Caldwell conspiracy revealed reserves valued at over $50 million. Enough money to transform Jake from a wrongfully convicted ex-convict into one of the wealthiest landowners in Texas. "The irony is staggering," Bradley explained as he delivered the news to Jake and Sarah in the clinic's office. "They destroyed your life trying to steal land that would have made you rich beyond imagination anyway. If they'd simply waited and made you a legitimate offer, everyone would have won." Judge William Harrison's arrest had triggered a domino effect that exposed corruption reaching the highest levels of Texas politics. His confession, delivered in exchange for a reduced sentence, revealed that the conspiracy involved 3 other judges, 2 state senators, and a network of developers who'd been manipulating environmental regulations for over a decade. Jake's case had become the catalyst for the largest political scandal in Texas history. The financial settlements began arriving as Thunder's health improved. The state offered Jake $12 million for his wrongful conviction, while civil suits against the Caldwell estate and co-conspirators promised tens of millions more. For the first time in his adult life, Jake found himself wealthy enough to ensure Thunder would receive the finest care available anywhere in the world. Sarah's transformation paralleled Thunder's recovery. As the financial pressure lifted and the bull's condition stabilized, she began sleeping through the night for the first time in months. The woman who'd sacrificed everything to keep Thunder alive during Jake's darkest hours was finally able to see a future beyond survival mode. When Jake quietly paid off her clinic's debts and established an endowment for large animal care, she broke down in tears that mixed relief with something deeper. Thunder's recovery accelerated dramatically once the correct treatment began. Within 2 weeks, his appetite had returned to normal, and his weight began increasing steadily. The massive bull, who'd appeared to be dying, was instead returning to the magnificent animal Jake remembered from before his imprisonment. His dark eyes regained their intelligence and warmth, and he began showing interest in his surroundings beyond the basic functions of survival. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman watched Thunder's transformation with the satisfaction of someone who'd never lost faith in the outcome. "I told you that bull had more fight left in him," she reminded Jake during one of her daily visits. "Harold always said animals know things we don't about healing and hope." Thunder was just waiting for the right medicine and the right reason to get better. The truth had emerged not just about Jake's innocence and Thunder's condition, but about the power of loyalty that transcended species boundaries. Thunder's sacrifice had saved Jake's life, but Jake's love had ultimately saved Thunder's. In a world where corruption and betrayal had nearly destroyed them both, their bond had proven stronger than lies, more enduring than injustice, and more healing than any medicine science could provide. 6 months later, the rolling green pastures of Sullivan Ranch stretched endlessly under the Texas sun, transformed from a foreclosed property into a sanctuary that had captured the world's imagination. Jake stood on the wraparound porch of his rebuilt farmhouse, watching Thunder graze peacefully among a herd of rescued cattle that had found their way to the 500-acre spread he'd purchased with his settlement money. The bull's black and rust-colored hide gleamed with health, his massive frame having regained the 300 pounds he'd lost during his years of suffering. Sarah emerged from the newly constructed veterinary clinic that occupied the ranch's eastern section, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light as she adjusted the stethoscope around her neck. The woman who'd nearly bankrupted herself saving Thunder was now the director of the Sullivan Foundation for Animal Advocacy, overseeing a state-of-the-art facility that provided free medical care for livestock across 3 counties. Their wedding was planned for the following month, with Thunder serving as the unofficial ring bearer in a ceremony that would be attended by dignitaries from around the world. "The documentary crew wants to film Thunder's medal ceremony tomorrow," Sarah said, settling into the porch swing beside Jake with the easy familiarity of 2 people who'd survived trauma together. "The president's representative will be here at noon to present the Presidential Medal of Freedom for Animals. It's the first time in history they've created such an award." Jake smiled as he watched Thunder lift his massive head, those intelligent dark eyes finding him across the distance with the same devotion that had sustained them both through 5 years of separation. The bull who'd carried evidence of Jake's innocence in his stomach had become a symbol of loyalty that transcended politics, religion, and nationality. Letters arrived daily from children around the world. Drawings of Thunder decorating the ranch office walls like a gallery of innocence and hope. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman approached from the guest cottage Jake had built for her, her arthritis-gnarled hands carrying a plate of the molasses cookies that had become Thunder's favorite treat. At 76, she'd found new purpose as the ranch's unofficial historian, documenting the stories of every rescued animal and maintaining correspondence with Thunder's global fan club. Her daily readings to the cattle had become a beloved ritual that attracted visitors from across the country. "That bull's got more sense than most politicians," she observed, settling into her favorite rocking chair as Thunder began his evening migration toward the porch. "Harold always said animals could teach us about loyalty if we paid attention. Thunder taught the whole world." The transformation of Jake's life extended far beyond personal vindication and financial security. The Sullivan Foundation had become a model for animal welfare advocacy, combining rescue operations with educational programs that reached millions of people annually. Jake's story, from death row to millionaire philanthropist, was being adapted into 3 different films and had inspired legislation in 12 states strengthening protections for wrongfully convicted defendants. Detective Tom Bradley arrived for his weekly visit, his retirement having begun the day after Jake's exoneration, when guilt over the near execution of an innocent man made continuing his career impossible. Now he served as the Foundation's head of security, his law enforcement experience invaluable in protecting the ranch from the constant stream of visitors and media attention. The man who'd built the case against Jake had become one of his closest friends, their bond forged through shared understanding of how truth could be buried beneath expedience and ambition. "The corruption trials are finally wrapping up," Bradley reported as he accepted a glass of sweet tea from Sarah. "Judge Harrison got 15 years, Caldwell Jr. got life without parole, and 6 other officials pled guilty to various charges. The civil settlements should total around $80 million when everything's finalized." Thunder's approach to the porch triggered the evening ritual that had developed over the months of recovery. The massive bull would position himself near the steps, allowing Jake to scratch behind his ears while Sarah checked his surgical site and Mrs. Whitman fed him cookies. The sight of a 1,200-pound Brahman bull accepting affection like an oversized pet never failed to amaze visitors. But for the ranch family, it had become as natural as sunrise. Doctor Rodriguez arrived from Austin with Thunder's latest medical reports, his monthly examinations confirming what everyone could see: the bull's complete recovery from his parasitic infection and surgical trauma. "He's in better condition now than he was before Jake's arrest," the doctor announced, his professional satisfaction evident. "The combination of proper nutrition, veterinary care, and emotional stability has reversed years of decline. He could live another 15 years easily." The ranch's success had created ripple effects throughout the community. Tourism generated millions of dollars annually for local businesses, while the Foundation's educational programs had inspired a new generation of animal welfare advocates. Jake's story was taught in criminal justice courses as an example of systemic failure and individual perseverance, while Thunder's loyalty was studied by animal behaviorists seeking to understand the depth of interspecies bonding. As evening shadows lengthened across the pastures, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of peace. 5 years of wrongful imprisonment had nearly destroyed his faith in justice, but Thunder's unwavering loyalty had preserved something more valuable than evidence: hope itself. The bull who'd swallowed Caldwell's ring to protect his master had also swallowed the despair that might have consumed them both. Sarah's hand found his as they watched Thunder settle into his favorite resting spot beneath the ancient oak tree that anchored the ranch's central pasture. "Do you think he understands how famous he's become?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder at the transformation their lives had undergone. "I think he understands that he's home," Jake replied, his own voice thick with emotion as Thunder's contented rumble carried across the evening air. "That's all he ever wanted, to protect his family and know we were safe." The wedding ceremony 3 weeks later brought together an unlikely congregation of dignitaries, celebrities, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by Thunder's story. The bull stood patiently as flower girls draped garlands around his neck, his gentle demeanor with children having become legendary among the ranch's staff. When Jake and Sarah exchanged vows beneath the oak tree where Thunder rested each evening, the bull's presence seemed to bless their union with the same loyalty that had saved Jake's life. As the sun set on their wedding day, casting golden light across pastures filled with rescued animals and surrounded by people who'd become family through shared purpose, Jake understood that Thunder's greatest gift hadn't been the evidence that proved his innocence. It had been the example of love that endures beyond reason, faith that survives beyond hope, and loyalty that transcends the boundaries between species. In a world where truth could be buried and justice delayed, Thunder had proven that some bonds are unbreakable, some love is unconditional, and some heroes have 4 legs and hearts big enough to carry the weight of the world. Folks, let me tell you about faithfulness that doesn't waver when the world turns its back. Remember when we believed in justice that couldn't be bought? Jake Sullivan's story brings us back to that belief. 5 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit, while his loyal Brahmin bull, Thunder, held the evidence inside his own body, waiting for someone to notice. That's the kind of devotion we understood back when a handshake meant something. Thunder almost died by lethal injection, but Thunder never stopped believing. Through cancer and pain, that bull held on, just like the generation that built this country with calloused hands and unwavering principles. When everyone gave up, it was Thunder who remembered what loyalty means. Now Jake walks free on his ranch with his faithful companion, watching sunsets they almost lost forever. Their story reminds us that in a world where truth seems flexible and justice can be purchased, some bonds remain unbreakable. The governor who nearly signed Jake's death warrant now pins medals on the dog who saved him. If that doesn't tell you God works in mysterious ways, I don't know what will. Sometimes the most powerful truth has 4 legs and a heart bigger than hate. What animal in your life taught you the deepest lesson about loyalty? Share a story about a time when faith kept you going when everyone else had given up. We'd love to hear how you found strength in your darkest hour.